So it's a reading of Emile by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Emile, also called On Education. It's a treatise on the nature of education, on the nature of man, written by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who considered to be the best and most important of all his writings, due to a section of the book entitled Professions of Faith and Savoyard Vicar. Emile was banned in Paris and Geneva, was publicly burned in 1762, the year of its first publication. During the French Revolution, Emile served as the inspiration for what became a new national system of education. So, speaking about what I know about that was off of Wikipedia. What I know about Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he's one of the great thinkers out of the Enlightenment, and he is usually juxtaposed with John Locke for their stances on human nature. John Locke says that human nature, if you were just to strip down society, civilization, all of our social instincts, caveman, the first mankind, they were savage beasts. And if there was no rules or society, he thinks that human nature would just kill each other. We'd just be a war against everybody. You'd be solitary, cold, afraid. There's like three things. There's solitary, alone. So basically it's a war against everybody, versus Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who says that human nature is good. We're inherently good people, but it's society and civilization which corrupts us. So I'm going to look up John Locke's human nature quote real fast. It could be actually Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes are the ones that says, my bad, I got that messed up. So Thomas Hobbes was the one that says human nature is chaotic and crazy, and he says that the life of an individual is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So he says we're all animals. We need to have a Leviathan, which tells us what to do. Versus Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who comes from a different perspective. I think it was out of The Social Contract, and it was a different book. But he said that human nature is good. We're fundamentally good, and it's civilization which corrupts us. So we are born free, but everywhere we are in chains. It is society, it is civilization, it's the institutions which corrupt us and change us from who we actually are. And I believe Jean-Jacques Rousseau is correct on this. I feel that every person has the capability of doing good or to do evil, and it's up to your own conscience and your own set of moral core, your own principles, which of those, which one of those two wolves you feed. It was like an old Cherokee proverb. An old Cherokee proverb said that there's two wolves in everybody, and one's, jealous and hateful and greedy and just wants to hurt other people, and the other one is love and caring and kindness, who wants to be nice to everybody. And the kid says, well, which one wins? Which one of these two wolves wins in this cosmic battle? And the Cherokee chief tells the kid, the Cherokee kid, it's whichever wolf you feed. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he says that we have human natures, that we're born good and society corrupts us. So his educational system, the institution for his education, is to build a structure around that notion. If we are born good and society and civilization corrupts us, then we need a system of education which creates the whole person, which develops the entire person, so they become super individuals, so they will not be corrupted by the heavy influences of society and civilization. So society and civilization won't corrupt an individual who was educated by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, because that person is such a hardcore super individual, knows what they want out of life, has a good moral core and moral philosophy, and that's it. So the education is to build around his philosophical ideas about human nature. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I've read a bunch of things about this, and actually it turns out that you have to read this if you want to get a good understanding of what Jean-Jacques Rousseau is saying. Okay, so there's a lot of secondary sources out there, but I think it's best to go straight. This document. Henry Adams actually says he's the first educator. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau is a clear break from the old classics of learning Greek and Latin and do as you're told and shut up, sit down, the type which is actually carried on till today. That tradition of disciplinarian, authoritarian culture is carried on till today. But this is an aberration away from it. Actually, he says until you're 12 years old, you shouldn't even teach the young person anything. You should just let them get used to being who they are, who their selves are. Let their own curiosity drive them, and so they can kind of wonder about the world for themselves. It's organized into 5 different books. The first 2 books talks about from 0 to 12, and then the second 2 books talks about 12 to 20, and then the 5th book talks about the age of wisdom, and then there's another book about how to educate a woman, because Emile is a man, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau's got 2 different ideas for the education of a man versus the education of a woman. So, okay, so let's just begin. 6 minutes in, so that gives me about 8 minutes to read some of this. Hopefully, I don't know, we'll see. Hopefully I'll enjoy it and keep on reading it. But this is the author's preface. This is Jean-Jacques Rousseau's preface to Emile, or On Education. Okay. This collection of scattered thoughts and observation has little order or continuity, has begun to give pleasure to a good mother who thinks for herself. My first idea was to write a tract a few pages long, but I was carried away by my subject, and before I knew what I was doing, my tract had become a kind of book, too large indeed for the matter contained in it, but too small for the subject of which it treats. For a long time I hesitated whether to publish it or not, and I've often felt, when at work upon it, that it was one thing to publish a few pamphlets and another to write a book. After vain attempts to improve it, I have decided that it was my duty to publish it as it stands. I consider that public attention requires to be directed to the subject, and even if my own ideas are mistaken, my time will not have been wasted if I stir up others to form the right ideas. Okay? So even if he's wrong and it stirs up others to develop the right ideas, then good, right? So, a solitary who casts his writings before the public without anyone to advertise them, without any party ready to defend them, one who does not even know what is thought and said about those writings, is at least free from one anxiety. If he is mistaken, no one will take his errors for gospel. I shall say very little about the value of a good education, nor shall I stop to prove that the customary method of education is bad. This has been done again and again. I do not wish to fill my book with things which everyone knows. I will merely state that, go as far back as you will find a continual outcry against the established method, but no attempt to suggest a better. The literature and science of our day tend rather to destroy than to build up. We find fault after the manner of a master to suggest we must adopt another style less in accordance with the pride of the philosopher. In spite of all those books, whose only aim, so they say, is public utility, the most useful of all arts, the art of training men, is still neglected. Even after Locke's book was written, the subject remained almost untouched. And I fear that my book will leave it pretty much as it found it. We know nothing of childhood, and with our mistaken notions, the further we advance, the further we go astray. The wisest writers devote themselves to what a man ought to know without asking what a child is capable of learning. They are always looking for the man in the child without considering what he is before he becomes a man. It is to this study that I have chiefly devoted myself, so that if my method is fanciful and unsound, my observations may still be of service. I may be mistaken as to what ought to be done, but I think I've clearly perceived the material which is to be worked upon. Begin thus by making a more careful study of your scholars, for it is clear that you know nothing about them. Yet if you read this book with that end in view, I think you will find it is not entirely useless. With regard to what will be called the systematic portion of the book, which is nothing more than the course of nature, it is here that the reader will probably go wrong, and no doubt I shall be attacked on this side, and perhaps my critics may be right. You will tell me this is not so much a treatise on education as the visions of a dreamer with regard to education. Well, what can I do? I have not written about other people's ideas of education, but about my own. My thoughts are not those of others. This reproach has been brought against me again and again, but it is within my power to furnish myself with other eyes or to adopt other ideas. It is within my power to refuse to be wedded to my own opinions and to refuse to think myself wiser than others. I cannot change my mind. I cannot distrust myself. This is all I can do, and this I have done. And if I sometimes adopt a confident tone, it is not to impress the reader. It is to make my meaning plain to him. Why should I profess to suggest as doubtful that which is not a matter of doubt to myself? I say just what I think. When I freely express my opinion, I have so little idea of claiming authority that I always give my reasons so that you may weigh and judge them for yourself. But though I would not obstinately defend my ideas and think it my duty to put them forward, for the principles with regard to which I differ from other writers are not matters of indifference. We must know whether they are true or false, for on them depends the happiness or the misery of mankind. People are always telling me to make practicable suggestions. You might as well tell me to suggest what people are doing already, or to at least suggest improvements when may be incorporated with the wrong methods at present in use. There are matters with regard to which such a suggestion is far more chimerical than my own, for in such a connection the good is corrupted and the bad is none the better for it. I'd rather follow exactly the established method than adopt a better method by halves. There would be fewer contradictions in the man. He cannot aim at one at the same time at two different objects. Fathers and mothers, what you desire that you can do. May I count on your goodwill? There are two things to be considered with regard to any scheme. In the first place, is it good in itself? In the second, can it be easily put into practice? With regard to the first of these, it is enough that the scheme shall be intelligible and feasible in itself, that what is good in it shall be adapted to the nature of things. In this case, for example, that the proposed method of education should be suitable to man and adapted to the human heart. The second consideration depends upon certain given conditions in particular cases. These conditions are accidental and therefore variable. They may vary indefinitely, but this one kind of education would be possible in Switzerland and not in France. Another would be adapted to the middle classes but not to the nobility. The scheme can be carried out with more or less success according to a multitude of circumstances, and its results can only be determined by its special application to one country or another, and to this class or that. Now, all these particular applications are not essential to my subject, and they form no part of my scheme. It is enough for me that wherever men are born into the world, my suggestions with regard to them may be carried out. And when you have made them what I would have them be, you have done what is best for them and best for other people. If I fail to fulfill this promise, no doubt I'm to blame. But if I fulfill my promise, it is your own fault if you ask anything more of me, for I have promised you nothing more. Book 1. God makes all things good. Man meddles with them and they become evil. So God makes humans are good. When man, society, civilization meddles with them, they become corrupted and evil. He forces one soil to yield the products of another, one tree to bear another's fruit. He confuses and he confounds time, place, and natural conditions. He mutilates his dog, his horse, and his slave. He destroys and defaces all things. He loves all that is deformed and monstrous. He will have nothing as nature made it, not even man himself, who must learn his paces like a saddle horse, and be shaped to his master's taste like the trees in his garden. Yet things would be worse without this education, and mankind cannot be made by halves. Under existing conditions, a man left to himself from birth would be more of a monster than the rest. Prejudice, authority, necessity, example, all the social conditions into which we are plunged would stifle nature in him and put nothing in her place. She would be like a sapling chance sown in the midst of the highway, bent hither and thither and soon crushed by the passers-by. So of course you've got to educate your children in order to protect our human nature. Of course there's got to be this. In education, a structure around how to make a human person virtuous, how to make good people. Tender, anxious mother. Footnote. The earliest, this is a long footnote. The earliest education is most important, and it undoubtedly is woman's work. If the author of nature had meant to assign it to men, he would have given them milk to feed the child. Address your treatises on education to the women, for not only are they able to watch over it more closely than men, not only is their influence always predominant in education, its success concerns them more nearly, for most widows are at the mercy of their children and show them very plainly whether their education was good or bad. The laws, always more concerned about property than about people, since their object is not virtue but peace, the laws give too little authority to the mother. So he's, there's going to be charges of sexism because he has a woman's education and a man's education, but he says all education is geared towards the woman since she has the biggest influence in a child's life.